Hi, I'm Emma, and welcome back to another episode of Four Corners Youth Corner Podcast Jeunesse. Today, I am with my guest here.
My name is Noah Bogner-Picard. My pronouns are he, him.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for coming in, Noah.
My pleasure.
So, as people will probably figure out through our conversation and our banter, we do know each other as well. We're quite good friends, previously roommates as well. So Noah is fairly familiar with my work here at Four Corners. He very graciously agreed to be part of this podcast as well. And today's topic is actually covering one of the big conversations in Four Corners and in a lot of organizations that work with the public in the Laurentians, and that is youth employability. So Noah, can you tell me the name of your place of work, like where it is you work and what exactly it is that you do?
So I work at Sommet, the ski hill in Saint-Sever. During the winter, I'm chef d'équipe or team leader of the rental shop.
Okay.
And then in the summer, I'm head lifeguard at the water park, the same company.
Okay.
But yeah.
Perfect. So I guess I'll ask you about the ski hill position first. How long have you been chef d'équipe there?
This is my second winter.
Your second winter with him,
Yeah.
and then as head lifeguard in the summer.
Last summer was my first winter as chef d'équipe. My first summer.
First summer.
First summer as chef d'équipe.
Okay,
Yeah.
very cool. So if I'm not mistaken, you've been working for, maybe not necessarily Le Sommet, but you've been working for the ski hills and the water parks for quite a while now, haven't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was my first job.
It was your first job, okay.
I've never had any other job.
Wow, okay. So what age did you apply to work? So did you apply to start at the ski hill or the water park first?
So I started at the water park.
Okay.
I was 17. It was a summer after high school.
It's true. It would be the summer after graduation for you.
Yeah. So I started at the water park, and I applied originally to work at the fun park, which is the amusement park.
Okay.
But they called me back, and they needed people in the kitchen. So my first summer I did that. Didn't like it, but I did it. And then I've been working there since.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if we're continuing in the vein of the water park, so the summer part of the job, when and why did you decide to switch over to the lifeguarding? Like, did you previously have lifeguarding training or not at all? No, okay.
So my first summer, like I said, I was working in the kitchen, and then I didn't like it. And I had my friend Emily who was working at the amusement park.
Okay.
And so I wanted to transfer over there the next year. I figured if I worked in the kitchen that first summer, I could transfer the next year. Mm-hmm. So I did, but I didn't transfer to the amusement park. I finally went to the water park as just a slide attendant.
Okay.
Which you don't need any previous experience or lifeguard training or anything like that. I think some water parks do, but not where I work.
Okay, because you weren't doing any kind of, there was no
no, it was just
CPR
like
resuscitation that was needed.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I did that for, I think, 4 summers.
Okay.
And then I became operator, which is like not really a boss, but basically like you take care of your team and you're in charge of your rotation and stuff like that.
Okay.
So I did that for 4 years. And then 2 years ago, they were offering to give us our beginner lifeguard courses.
Oh, so it was offered through work then?
Yeah.
Oh, very nice.
They don't do it every year, but that year they were missing lifeguards and they needed more people. So, and one of the lifeguards there, she was certified to give the course. So I decided, all right, why not? So I did it and I became assistant lifeguard. And then at the beginning of last summer, I got my full lifeguard courses and everything.
Okay. Well, and see, lifeguarding is such an interesting job to talk to people about because a lot of people do it, and yet it's a job that's always in demand.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if that's unique to Quebec or if it's unique to Canada, but as for, I think since I graduated high school, at least, there has always been a major demand for lifeguarding.
Yeah.
How do you find the job? Like, is it a job that you would recommend to high schoolers today to do?
I love it, especially in the summer. You're outside all the time. You get to enjoy your summer. Like, it honestly doesn't feel like work, even though you're working. That's why I've stayed for so long, is that, like, you enjoy. It's long days, obviously. It's you start at 10 a.m., or at least where I work, we start at 10 and finish at 7 p.m. So
Okay,
they're like
so it's a pretty
10-hour
long day.
days.
Yeah.
But if you're working full time, it's only 4 days a week.
Oh,
so you have
okay.
3 days off. And then where I work, they ask us for another fifth availability day, but that can mean that like some days or some weeks you do overtime, and then other weeks you only work your 4 days and that's it. So
Okay.
like, yes, it's long days, but I mean, in the summer it goes by so fast that like it honestly doesn't matter, you know?
That's true. That's true. Yeah, I guess I hadn't considered that part. I didn't, for some reason in my head, I was thinking more that it was like a 7-day-a-week kind of thing.
Yeah.
But 4 days a week, it does make sense as well. Given the nature of the job and the things that you could potentially be facing, it does make sense that you would want people to be pretty rested for that. So we'll come back to the summer position as a lifeguard later on, but now, especially because we're still enjoying the lovely depth of winter right now, so you're currently working at the ski hill, and as of recording this, it is the first Tuesday of spring break for a lot of the schools in Quebec. So maybe not necessarily spring break. I know that is usually a very, very busy time of year for the ski hills, but what does a typical day consist for you and for your team?
So it really depends. It's more, the week is broken up into two parts kind of. You have the weekdays and then the weekends. Well, weekends and weeknights.
Okay.
So during the weekdays, we have a lot of school groups, especially now, and like this past month in February, we've had a lot of school groups that come and rent equipment and come to ski and everything. And then we have our regular kind of clientele, you know, on the weekends and weeknights as well. Weeknights have been busy even during the beginning of the week, you know, like Mondays, Tuesdays, every weeknight is pretty busy.
I bet.
And then the weekends, again, for the past month and a half, we've been really busy. And then there's like people with private lessons who don't have equipment and stuff, people who are learning to ski who have to rent equipment. So there's always a lot of people.
There's always a lot, I bet. So because you work with equipment rentals as well too, what kind of equipment do people need to be? I know that for a lot of people in Quebec, skiing is second nature. Skiing and swimming kind of go hand in hand for us because of the climate that we live in. But for people that maybe don't ski or are new to Quebec, what kind of equipment do people need to rent? Like, what is mandatory for them to rent other than just the skis when they're going to a hill?
So what we rent is skis, ski boots, the poles, and the helmet.
Okay.
And then you can rent individually. Like, if you only need a helmet, you can rent the helmet.
Okay.
A lot of people think we rent goggles. We don't rent goggles either.
That's good to know for a lot of people as well. So you do have to bring your own goggles.
Yeah. Some people as well, you'll see, especially if it's their first time skiing, or people who've recently come to Canada or Quebec and want to try skiing and everything, and then they'll show up without snow pants or mittens and stuff like that, or coats, and we're like, that's not part of the equipment. Like, you have to bring your own coat and pants and stuff. So we do sell some, and in the rentals we have some cheaper options, because a lot of the stuff, if you go to the boutique and stuff, is really expensive.
Well, good ski gear anywhere is quite expensive. It's definitely an investment. It's not something that you do just for one weekend.
As even your skis and your boots and stuff, like, a lot of people can't afford it. That's why you have to rent. So a lot of people do rent, you know.
Okay. So I definitely can see how that would be like one of the busiest elements of a ski hill. Like, even in the few times that I have been skiing, it seems like every part of a ski hill is super busy at any time that you go, but the kind of busyness is different. But like, I know that the first few times I did it, I had to rent as well too, and I remember going in and I think you might have actually been there that year. I think it might have been your first year there. And I just remember thinking, oh my gosh, like, there's so much going on here right now.
There's a lot.
Do you, maybe not now because you've been at it for so long, but the first year that you did it, or maybe the first few years that you did it, did you find it at all overwhelming?
Not really. My first years I was working there, I was only working full time.
Okay.
Sorry, part time. I was going to school during the week, and then I was working on weekends. I think I was working 2 days a week, so I wasn't there all the time. And I've worked at different hills.
Yeah.
All for the same company, but at different hills. So I've done 3 of them so far, and where I was working in the beginning, it was less busy, or at least it seemed less busy. I don't know if it actually was, but I don't know. I guess I didn't really understand the whole of it. So I don't know. To me, it was just like, all right, I'm there to work and make money. So
well, there you go. There you go. So I guess the next thing that I want to ask about is that, especially considering you started this quite young. So you were 17 when you started working,
yeah.
right? Okay. So that's pretty similar to me. I think I was 16 when I got my first job too. What was the lead up to getting your first job like, if you can remember it? Like, what was first? I guess the first question I would ask is, what made you decide, or what factors required you to go and get a job?
So, well, I remember. To me, when I was 17 and I got my first job, I remember thinking like, oh my God, like I have to get a job now because like I'm going off to CEGEP and like I need to save up and stuff like that. I remember people in high school who were already working. Some of my friends were already working. I was like, I have not had a job all of high school. And then some of the people I knew had started working at like 14, 15. And I'm like, what am I doing? Like, it's so late. I have to start working now. So it was kind of that. It felt like if I didn't get a job now, like I'm moving to Montreal for school, and like after that, it's going to be too overwhelming.
It's going to be too much.
It's now or never.
I understand. I think I had a kind of a similar situation when I started. So the first summer that work and jobs came into the conversation was just before summer started when I was 15. So I would have been in secondary 3 at that point, which if anybody is listening and they are not part of or did not come out of the Quebec education system, secondary 3 is the equivalent of grade 9. So I was 15 at that point, and the conversation started, and I don't remember it being much more than a situation of, my parents started working at that age.
Yeah.
So I was expected to start working at that age. And I guess at the time I didn't understand why. I just kind of did it.
Yeah, I was just like,
because I was like, well, it's what I have to do now. But I never put much more thought into it. I know that was when the conversation started, but my parents wanted me to, quote unquote, stay a kid for one more summer. So I got my first job at a gas station when I was 16. And I worked for all of 2 weeks before I had to go on medical leave because I had surgery that required me to be out for a month and a half. But then I've been working ever since then too. And I've worked, as you well know, I've worked several different jobs. So work a little bit different in that regard. You've been in one spot for the whole entirety of your career, and I've been through, like, I've lost count after 6. But I think that gives kind of a unique perspective, is that, like, it can go either way. I think I think there's still a mentality for a lot of youth, and I don't know if it's unique to the Laurentians or if it's because of, like, just where we live. I don't know. But a lot of people still seem to have the mentality of, like, when you start a job, you have to be there until, like, the job goes under, or you hopefully never have to experience it, but that you get fired or laid off. And then you have to scramble to find the next thing, which is actually not the reality at all. It's more normal now, at least, to do a bunch of different things, or if you really like what you're doing, to stay in it as well. I think it really comes down to preference more than anything else now.
I've been really lucky, honestly, and what's fun about it too is I have the summer and the winter, which is like 2 complete different opposites.
No kidding.
So like that's part of the reason why I've stayed, and I've been really lucky. Like, it doesn't feel like I've been there. I think it's now 6 years, my 6th year, and it doesn't feel like that at all. And like you said, sometimes I'm like, I think about it, I'm like, okay, like, this is still like my first job, first and only job I've ever had. So sometimes I'm like, okay, but like, it's also a place where I could very well stay and like make a career
out of it. Exactly.
Yeah.
No, and I think that there's something brilliant to be said about that. There is a certain element of luck to it,
Yeah.
but by the same token, like you have built a career out of that too. Like you are one of the faces of that place now because you've been there for so long. So I guess the next thing, and it kind of ties into that as well too, not entirely, but what social skills did you learn, at least in the first few years of working, and then maybe since then as well too? What social skills have you learned from working and being a youth when you started working?
Yeah. I've definitely learned to, obviously I work with the public.
Yes.
So that's a big one. Also, obviously, a lot of responsibility, and especially over the years, moving on up and getting new positions, more important positions. Like during the summer, we're in charge of not only by myself, like I have 3 supervisors and somebody else who's chef d'équipe with me, but it's still around 100 or a bit more than that, 100 employees.
Okay.
So a lot of responsibility for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, a big one right now, I'd say, is working with the public and dealing with the public. It's something that I love to do, sometimes a lot overwhelming, especially in the recent years.
For sure.
And I think in the winter, it's a lot more demanding,
What makes it more demanding in the winter than in the summer?
In the winter, I deal a lot more with the public rather than in the summer.
Okay.
The summer, I deal more with the employees rather than the public.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in the winter, it's a lot of dealing with customers and complaints and making sure people are happy and people getting to their lessons on time.
A lot more service work than in
which
the summer.
Can take a toll on you sometimes, especially when it's always busy.
Yeah.
Sometimes I dread the weekends because I'm like, okay.
I definitely know that I've called you a few times while you were at work, and it's like, that's not the Noah that I know.
I'm like, sometimes I'm like, and then I get home and I don't want to talk. I'm like, don't talk to me for at least an hour. I've been dealing with people, and I had my mom and my sister the other day come to see me at work, and it's just one thing after another, dealing with people and stuff. I looked at my mom and I'm like, you see why I don't want to talk at home now? Like, do you get it? Because it's...
Well, I feel like that's, and I've talked to a couple of people. I even talked recently to a couple of people who are still in high school about exactly that too, and that feeling of like, why am I so exhausted at the end? Like I feel bad because I don't want to go out. I don't want to talk to my friends on the phone. I don't even want to be texting people. And I think more people need to talk about exactly that because it is a reality. You can love your job and also be exhausted by the end of the day. Both things can be true at the same time. I know that I'm very much the same way. As you well know too, I have to have at least 2 hours of time every evening after work where I'm just alone and not talking to people. So I think the more that we normalize that for people, and the younger that becomes normalized is crucial, because you can't do your job well if you're burnt out and you're exhausted. And contrary to popular belief, burnout can happen anytime in your life. It's not something that just affects adults over the age of 40. It can affect you as early as your teens, if not even younger. So it's something to always be aware of.
Yeah.
So to that end, we're going to come back around to like youth employability skills. Like, what are things that you would recommend, like skills that you would recommend youth looking for their first job to have? But before we do that, I want to ask you about, how you cope with that fatigue and that exhaustion. Like, what are things that energize you at the end of a workday?
Definitely having my off hours at home going, and sometimes I just go into my room and I'll say hi and everything and talk for like 15 minutes and then go down to my room and then I'll watch a movie or I'll scroll on my phone. Most often I'll go talk to my friends, and then at least that gives me an insight into what they're doing.
Yes.
Like our friend Brooke, who works at an elementary school, and she talks to me about her day and stuff. Yeah. Which is like...
That's a whole other realm of work as well, too.
Yeah. So I'm like, at least listening to that and being like, oh, okay, like, first of all, I'm not alone, and like,
Yes.
dealing, even though it's not dealing with the same things, or it doesn't seem to be the same things, there's a lot of similarities, you know?
Yeah.
So we're all dealing with a lot of the same things, even if it's in different domains, you know?
Very much so.
So, and then just taking my mind off of work and stuff. And sometimes it's hard to, when you get home, especially, to like stop thinking about it.
Yes.
I'll go back the next day and then I'll talk to my supervisor and be like, well, I was thinking about this and this. And she's like, yeah, eh? And I'm like, yeah, like
Yeah.
sometimes you lay in bed and you're like, how can we improve this? Or
Yeah.
what can we do about this?
Your brain is always working. It must have been the same thing for you. I know that when I first started working, and you know, when I started my first job too, I was a very introverted, very shy, very closed off person as a teenager as well too. You know, I loved my friends and I loved my family and whatnot, but I was just so scared of everything all the time that everything felt exhausting.
Yeah.
And exactly that, you know, I'd be thinking about things that happened at work, good or bad, forever. My brain would never turn off from work mode. And I think that that is really important for people who are getting their first job, or even if they've been in their job for a couple of years now. If you are listening to this and you are about to get your first job, you need to understand beforehand that it's okay to stop working when your workday is done. Like, it's time to put it away and go do your own thing. Whatever you need to do to put work to bed for the night, do it. Because that is, and I think that that's one of the biggest factors of being able to continue loving your job, is to be able to, I don't think you can ever fully separate your work life and your personal life. I think that is a myth, unfortunately, that has been perpetuated. But you can definitely, they can be in the same room without holding hands, is how I usually phrase it. So they will always affect each other, but they don't have to be one and the same. And I think that can be really hard, especially when you're young, to differentiate them, especially if, I know that for Laurentian youth as well, so many of us, we leave home so young to go to school. You know, I was freshly 17 when I moved away from home to start going to school. And as my father put it, I was too old to stay and too young to leave. And I think that that's the case for a lot of Laurentians youth. And so as a result, your job becomes your social life. There's a certain sense of security to it as well, which I'm sure with how long you've been at Le Sommet as well, there is an element of that too. Your social life revolves around work. And it can be really tricky to separate the two of them.
I think it's really important. Like, I'm grateful and I'm lucky to have, obviously, my friends outside of work, you know?
For sure.
And working full time now, like last year it was a bit different because I was working 4 days a week and then going to school the other days.
Which is a big workload.
Yeah. But even then, at the same time, it felt like less pressure because at least I had other things to focus on other than work. So even though it seems like it was a big workload, like in reality, it was kind of nice to have like those days that I would completely leave and go to Montreal, you know, and then go to school and have nothing to do with work and keep it, you know, separate and have something else to focus on. And I think that's super important. I think it's now working 5 days a week full time. It's harder, obviously, the more you work, but you have to, on your days off, like sometimes I feel like not doing anything, and there's my 2 days off, I don't do anything, but I think it's super important not to stay in that habit and do other things, even though sometimes you might not feel like it, you know, but it's like, go see your friends and go do other things, and that helps you completely. You'll feel, even though in the moment or thinking about it, you're like, oh no, like I don't feel like it. But at the end, after it happens, you're like, oh my God, like there's a whole other world outside of work.
There is.
So it's kind of like easy sometimes, obviously, when you're working full time, but even for students and stuff, that,
for sure,
you've got school and then you've got work. It's easy to like stick into that routine and then feel like that's all there is. But you know, like
but there is more out there, and I think that the more that you can let yourself experience outside of work, the more that you can bring into your work as well too.
Absolutely.
Because you're kind of, our previous guest just before your episode as well too, one of the things that one of them said was that you're always learning. And it's true. Your brain is developed to constantly be taking in stimuli. And the more of that you can take in, the more of it you can process, and the more of it you process, the more of it you can apply. And so that really is, I think, the best juncture between work and personal life as well.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the best link of the two to nurture. But yeah, it's an interesting thing to discuss, because every time that I talk to somebody about the same answer, especially the older we get, it might be a little bit harder to verbalize when we're younger, because we just don't have the life experience to kind of piece things together. But as we get older, things start to make sense and you start having the words for them as well. So it's okay for it to not make sense when you're younger, but it will eventually. So like I said, we're going to come back around to employability skills as well. So you're in a position, we talked about this just before we started recording as well too. So you don't oversee hiring, but you are involved in performance reviews, correct?
Yep, absolutely.
So in that case, especially pertaining to younger employees, people who are maybe new to the job and they're trying to learn, but they maybe don't have all of the skill set just yet, which is totally normal. What are skills that people should be prepared to promote for themselves when they're going into an interview or when they're going into a performance review? And then how should people perceive a performance review? Because I am one of the guilty members of society. When I know that a performance review is coming up, immediately I start to panic. Even though I know that I'm doing my job just fine, my brain starts to look for all of the problems and all of the mistakes that I made in the last 6 months or the last year, which I'm sure is probably something that you face with some of the employees that you're doing these reviews for. So let's start with what skills people should be, what day-to-day skills they should be using, and then how to prepare yourself for performance review.
Right. So I think one of the big skills, and sometimes is lacking in most younger people, or they don't know how to apply themselves, is initiative, I'd say.
Okay.
That's one of the tough ones, and that, I don't know if it's because they're just starting to work, or they're not used to working outside of a
school context.
A school environment. Exactly. They're very well looked after at school, and so they're just entering the job force, and sometimes they lack the initiative to go forward and do things on their own without having somebody behind them saying like, hey, do this and do that.
That is a hard one too, and I think you and I come from slightly different situations, just given our own upbringings and the people that we were raised by and the environments we were raised in, where we did kind of have that instinct of internal initiative pretty early on, which I think maybe, I don't know if it made things confusing for you. I know it definitely made things confusing for me when some of my peers, when I was much, much younger, didn't have that instinct right away. And it made me think, like, why was that not obvious to you? And I realized that was a fault on my own part to have that thought, because I was actually the one that was not quote unquote normal in that situation.
Exactly.
And in school too, exactly that. You're being told what you need to do, and you're being given instructions to follow. Whereas at work, maybe you're given a set of instructions once on your first day, and then you have to just go. So if you can elaborate more on that, I think a lot of people might find that really helpful.
Well, sometimes for me, same as you were saying, like sometimes, especially with my employees, I kind of find it frustrating, because I'm like, well, that's not what I would do. Like I would just go and do it. Like sometimes we have rental kiosks, so the customers have to go and register themselves in there. And the public is not patient.
No.
So, and then to see like sometimes the employees not going immediately towards the customer, going to help immediately. Some do, obviously. I'm speaking in general terms, you know? But then I see that, I'm like, okay, why aren't you like, where's the initiative? What are you doing? But at the same time, I'm like, okay, well, oh, that's probably something that I would have done. Obviously, go towards the customer, go see them. But again, like, I'm not them, I'm not in their position. So sometimes it can be frustrating on that end. But at the same time, like, I can understand, you know, like, it's your first job or one of your first jobs. And what do I do? Or sometimes it's, I don't want to mess up, or I don't want to, I'm afraid to do something wrong, so I just won't do it, you know? Which we've had conversations with some employees. It's like, forget about what the outcome is. Like, if you're nervous, you have any questions, like, we're always there to help. Go for it. Worst case, you make a mistake, and then we'll fix it. I rather you do something and make a mistake rather than, like, not do anything at all, you know?
It's true. And I think, you know, especially when you're that young, every mistake that you make
seems fatal.
Seems fatal, exactly. That's a good way of putting it, too. It does. It feels fatal every time you make the slightest slip up. But the thing with these jobs, too, especially in your first job, and especially when your employer or your supervisor or your manager knows that this is your first job, they're going to be, by and large, a lot more forgiving. Like, it's not the end of the world if you make a mistake. Even if you make several mistakes, you're expected to. So I'm glad that you brought that up, too, because I know that when I first started, that was I made, there's a memory in my mind that I won't get into just because it's a long story, but there was a mistake that I made early into my first job that actually was not a mistake on my part. It was unfortunately my kindness had been taken advantage of by a customer who was not a very nice person. But at the time, it had looked like it was my mistake. And I thought, well, that's it. I'll never be able to work again. I'll never be hired. I'm going to lose this job, and I'm never going to be hired anywhere else again. Completely untrue. Everybody vouched for me, and it was a very easily solved problem. But I think so many youth have that fear.
Absolutely.
And that kind of stops them. Like you said, you know, you're afraid of making a mistake, so you just don't do anything that could possibly cause a mistake. But that's not the way to approach things.
And I'm close to their age as well, you know, so it's like, I can understand how they're feeling, so I'm grateful that I'm not, like, somebody older taking care of, like, we have a lot of young people who are still in high school working, so I'm glad that I'm not that far in age from them, that I can understand and help them, you know, help like that.
Don't be afraid to ask for help.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. So we're going to wrap up pretty shortly. So one of the last things I want to ask you about is about the performance reviews, and, you know, whether it's a formal performance review or just a situation where you are getting to have a conversation with your direct superior. What advice would you give to somebody who either is in high school or freshly out of high school, or who has just started their first job or is new to this job and is about to go into a performance review for the first time ever? What advice would you give them for them to see what a performance review actually is like, what to take away from it, and how to see it in a positive way rather than a negative way?
I know it can be very hard to think of it that way, especially, again, when they're young and it's one of their first experiences like that. But it's not that serious, you know? It's more constructive than anything, you know? Again, it's one of your first jobs, and we're just there to help you learn and be better, you know? So it's never anything like, oh, like, if you fail this, you're getting fired. Like, it's absolutely nothing like that. And it feels so, like, threatening, you know, or it can at least, but it's never like that. And at least I know for myself, you know, when I get, because the same thing happens to me from my supervisors at the end of the season or whatever, and we have a meeting and stuff like that. Like, God, I'm, like, nervous and everything, and I'm like you said earlier, I'm thinking of everything. I'm like, oh my God, like, what about that one time when I was like, he got mad and, like, I didn't do exactly, but, like, everything was fine in the end. But so it's never that deep, you know. And take it as a learning moment, you know. Everything that they tell you, use it to your advantage, and use it to be
because that's
better,
why they're telling you that. They're giving you tools rather than roadblocks.
It's never, don't think of it as something to be reprimanded by, you know. It's not like that at all.
You're not in trouble.
No, exactly. And even when they tell you that, you're like, you're not in trouble, and we've had a few meetings, like, these past 2 weeks, and
Yeah.
sometimes like, you're not in trouble, and I get it, like I would be nervous too, and I'm like nervous talking to you like this as well, but it's not that deep, you know?
Yeah. No, I think I feel like that's starting to happen more and more, especially with our generation, because you and I are only 3 years apart, but with our generation kind of getting into the positions of workplace leadership too, that's something that I've been hearing more and more, is people starting these situations with, you're not in trouble.
Yeah.
And it's funny and we can laugh about it, but there is also a really big kindness behind that too, because we've all been in that position. So with that, we're going to wrap up. If anybody who is listening or watching to this episode, if you are about to go get your first job, you're applying to your first jobs, or you have your first job and it's going really well, or you're struggling, whatever it is, I promise you there are other people that have been through it, because Noah and I here have been through it. So don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Everything is a learning experience. And we wish you the best of luck in your professional endeavors. Noah, thank you so much for being here. And this has been another episode of Four Corners Youth Corner Podcast Jeunesse.